Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and welcome to Cracking Addiction. And we have with us Richard, Dr. Richard Bradlow, I should say. I thought we'd start off today by discussing melatonin and how it applies to sleep.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for having me on once again, Ferghal. What is melatonin? Well, melatonin is a neurotransmitter. It is a monoamine, much like dopamine and serotonin and noradrenaline. And melatonin is produced by the pineal gland. Now, what is the pineal gland most famous for, in my mind?
So I would have thought that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul.
Absolutely. But you're missing it. It's not the seat of the soul. It's the connector of the soul. It's not where the soul lives. It's where the soul connects to the material plane.
All right. It's the point where it's like the Matrix, isn't it? It's the point where all of the soul goes into the brain. So instead of having a hole in the back of the brain, we have naturally a pineal gland. I believe. Yeah. I think Descartes would have agreed with me on that one.
According to Rene Descartes, who, as we know, was a smelly old guy.
No, which song taught us that?
That's the Bruce's Philosophy song by Monty Python.
Is it? I would have thought it's the Monty Python song.
Yeah, it's called Bruce's Philosophy song because it's by the four Australian philosophers all called Bruce. Immanuel Kant was a real person who was very... Anyway, we've very much digressed.
So you mean to tell me that your entire philosophical education was brought on by that song? I never thought I'd hear that in Australia, actually, thinking about it.
But anyway. They're being Australian philophers in that.
All right.
Anyway,
right. I didn't get that joke.
So
the pineal gland.
The pineal gland. Melatonin is produced in the pineal gland. And keyly about melatonin, what people often miss is it doesn't keep you asleep. It helps you fall asleep.
Exactly.
And it is also keyly for sleep hygiene, which I think we're going into.
Yeah, we'll talk about sleep hygiene.
Bright light, especially blue light, actually suppresses the release of melatonin, which is why it's so important to not have, say, a big ring light like I have in my face right now if you're hoping to get a good night's sleep. But, and this is what I want to talk about just before we get into sleep hygiene, what is, Ferghal, can you tell me about, what are your thoughts about prescribing melatonin to patients?
All right. Okay. Well, first of all, and this is relevant to the prescribing of melatonin. First of all, melatonin not only induces sleep, but it also suppresses gonadal development. And I'll tell you why. In species, not humans, but in species who have a specific breeding season, that breeding season is actually brought about by light. So when we have a lot of light in the spring and the summer and it's time to breed, the light suppresses the melatonin and then therefore disinhibits gonadal growth. So therefore, there are certain species, and I can't remember off the top of my head which these species are, but there are certain, for instance, mammals on the plains of Siberia and in the US, where their testicles massively enlarged, so like grapes compared to little grains of rice. And that's due to the disinhibition due to light suppressing melatonin. So what do I think about the prescribing of melatonin? Well, we have a tonic melatonin secretion, right? All human beings secrete melatonin. The concentration of melatonin per kilogram of body weight falls as we grow. So in young babies, they've got a high concentration of melatonin. But as we get older, that concentration falls because we get bigger and you don't actually secrete more and more and more and more melatonin. So therefore, there comes a point round about puberty when, again, you have this disinhibition of gonadal growth. So actually, melatonin is associated with the suppression of gonadal growth in adolescence until such time as we reach puberty. So the point I want to make is there is a theoretical interference with exogenous melatonin on gonads. Now, that's not been proven. I just think, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. But the key thing is that exogenous melatonin does not really suppress endogenous melatonin secretion, which is good news. The next issue, though, is you actually got to work out what it is you're buying. Because if you can buy 10 milligram tablets of melatonin off the internet, chances are it doesn't have 10 milligrams. There's a huge variation in the concentration of melatonin per tablet. And so, the only way to actually get melatonin and actually get the dose right is to actually get it from a prescription. But prescribed melatonin in Australia is like costs an arm and a leg. And so there's a great, understandably, a great impetus to actually buy it off the internet. And it's perfectly legal to buy melatonin tablets off the internet and import them into Australia. It's not a controlled substance. My only concern is, what are the side effects of melatonin? Very, very few, but, it physiologically does suppress gonadal development. So do you, don't you, especially in kind of adolescent kids. And that's exactly the time when mothers want their kids to have melatonin, especially if they've been treated with stimulants for ADHD. So I don't know.
Ferghal,
What's your thought?
My question. Well, here is my question. What, according to the meta-analysis that I read, how quickly, much more quickly, does melatonin, this is pharmaceutical grade melatonin, proper melatonin, and what you've raised is absolutely a problem, right? When they do tests on those melatonin, a lot of the batches, they actually differ per batch in the same company. So you really are, when it's not pharmaceutical grade, it's you don't really know what you're getting. But how much quicker does taking melatonin help you get to sleep?
I would imagine no more than 20 minutes. I don't know.
3 minutes.
What?
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah,
3 minutes.
And they had some confusing way of testing sort of sleep quality that I couldn't quite understand, but the relative improvement in sleep quality was 2%. And essentially, this meta-analysis concluded that it's placebo. It's entirely placebo. That is what we're prescribing, and that really rings true to me, because you just don't want to give something that promotes dependence, and that is what I think is the absolute reason for the prescription of melatonin in clinical practice.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that. My understanding of all sleepers and all hypnotics is that the effect is actually minimal on sleep induction, and it actually knackers deep sleep. But I don't think I'm pretty sure that melatonin doesn't actually affect the sleep architecture, but it's pretty useless.
Affect sleep quality.
Exogenous melatonin is pretty useless. So we're saying that exogenous melatonin doesn't actually bring on sleep any further. But we cannot discount the actual physiology where melatonin actually is needed for induction of sleep. What we're saying is that this is exogenous. Yeah.
Well, and I think what we're really saying there is an obvious difference between you getting melatonin directly into your CNS and you having oral melatonin.
Which then brings us into the consideration of the kinetics of melatonin. So, melatonin is metabolized by the liver, and I'm not entirely sure what the bioavailability of oral melatonin is. I can
tell you what the first pass effect is.
You can or cannot?
Oh, I couldn't. I know.
Yeah. So the thing is, if you've got alcohol use disorder and you then develop cirrhosis, right? You fail to metabolize melatonin as much as you'd otherwise do. So you end up with this chronically elevated melatonin level. So when you're awake, you're fairly drowsy because you've got bucket loads of melatonin hanging about the system. And when you're trying to go to sleep, you're not able to get to sleep because you've got no spike in melatonin, right? Because you've just got this constant level. Remember, our bodies require rhythm. So at night, we need high levels of melatonin, and at daytime, we need 0 levels of melatonin. So all of this, the people with cirrhosis cannot metabolize it, therefore live constantly in this gray zone where they don't get enough sleep. And they're tired during the day and they don't sleep well at night. And of course, what do they say? They say, "Oh, I want more melatonin, doc." That's my problem with exogenous melatonin, is in people with liver cirrhosis, because it's not helping at all, and it's making the problem worse.
So, Ferghal, what should you do? How can I make my sleep better?
Well, I think really you've got to augment the circadian rhythm and take advantage of your natural melatonin secretion. So there's a number of things you can think about in terms of sleep hygiene. But the very basic point is that sleep hygiene actually begins in the morning, not in the night. Because remember, during the daytime, we need zero melatonin, and then we need a large rush of it at night. So how do you suppress melatonin in the daytime? Well, first of all, you got to get up at the same time every day, and then you got to expose yourself to natural light. Now, there are people are always trying to say, well, what does that mean? So, can you look at the sky through a window and suppress your melatonin?
Yes.
No, you can't, because the window reduces the light intensity by 50-fold. So can you wear glasses and look at the light and suppress your melatonin?
I mean, are we talking seeing eyeglasses or sunglasses?
Yeah. The glasses that I'm wearing. Yeah. Can you?
Yeah.
It's obvious you can't wear sunglasses, but can you wear normal lenses? And the answer is yes, because you can, because the lenses are actually focusing the light precisely on the retina. They're correcting either a short eyeball or a long eyeball. So they're making all of the light land specifically on the fovea.
But I'm going to challenge you on that previous statement. You absolutely can look through a window and suppress melatonin. It's just not going to be as effective as if you were outside. If it's a sunny day,
of course you can, right?
Yeah.
Right. But you are reducing the light intensity that's getting to your eyes by 50-fold. Sure. So, why would you bother? Because that means you have to stand and look at the light 50 times longer to get the same effect. Right? So, this is why I say you need to get outdoors and sky gaze outdoors. Now, even a lot of people would say, well, what if it's a cloudy day? Well, on a bright summer's day, we have 100,000 lux of light intensity. On a kind of a cloudy day, that drops to 25,000 lux. On an overcast really dark overcast day, that drops to 10,000 lux. Now, if you compare that with industrial lighting will give you 5,000 lux. Office lighting will give you 500 lux. Home lighting will give you 50. Street lighting will give you 20. And moonlight will give you 1. So with the best will in the world, in bright office light, which is 500 lux, you're getting 20 times more light intensity if you're looking directly at a sky that's about to rain. It's full of clouds, full of gray clouds. So that's why I say, irrespective of the weather, get outside and look at the sky, not at the sun, but at the sky. And you need to use that light to suppress melatonin. There's a couple of other things you need to do as well. What's your views on exercise and cold showers in the morning?
So exercise, absolutely, for a multitude of reasons. The interesting thing about exercise is you'll often see in sleep hygiene studies that there's sort of advice that says don't exercise for 2 hours before bed. But I actually read into this last year, and whenever they actually measure this, it does not affect sleep quality exercising 2 hours before bed. So I really challenge that. That is something. Yeah, they've done trials.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah,
because I'm one of those purveyors of that particular myth that you shouldn't exercise, 3 hours before bed. But that's not true, you say.
Well, I can pull up the study for you, but they were pretty. It was a supposed meta-analysis, but my memory is there was one RCT that they said they did the analysis and they found one paper. But their conclusion was no, it did not. And I'm sure perhaps that a lot of people it would depend on where you're exercising. A lot of people are exercising in brightly lit gyms, so perhaps there's another thing. And I think for a bunch of other reasons, it's important to wind down, and perhaps it's interrupting the sort of rhythm you're trying to set up with good sleep hygiene. Yeah. But this particular study found no reason why you couldn't exercise 2 hours before gym. But the question was about exercising and cold showers in the morning. Absolutely, you should exercise in the morning, and that's a twofer because most people are getting out when they exercise. So you're getting your windowless light exposure, which I know you feel is so important. A cold shower is more interesting I've never particularly
That's
heard
one way
of
of
it.
putting it.
Yeah, I've never particularly heard of its value in sleep hygiene before, but I'm willing to be educated.
So, in my humble opinion, it's all about the way that body temperature is used to regulate the body. Because think about it, how does the brain tell the body it's time to wake up and time to go to bed? Right? I'm talking every single cell in the body, right, is entrained to the circadian rhythm produced by the brain, and the answer is via body temperature. So, in the morning, our body temperature has to rise, and in the evening, it has to fall. Right? So one of the ways of quickly getting your body temperature to rise is actually cold exposure, because you have this paradoxical thermic effect. So if you're exposed to cold, what do? You shut down your peripheries and you start shivering. Well, what does that do? That accelerates the rise in body temperature that you need in the morning to actually give your body the signal to wake up. And the opposite is true at night, because when in the evening, if you have a nice warm shower, or if you have a nice hot bath or have a hot drink, what does that do? Well, that increases the heat stimulus peripherally, increases peripheral vasodilation. What does that do? That allows you to lose heat, thereby cooling your core temperature, which then tells me, then kind of suggests to me the functional reason why people need to sleep with bed socks. If you've got cold feet, you are not losing heat at night. So if you've got poor circulation and or cold feet, you need to warm your feet up so that the vessels in your feet dilate so that you lose heat through your feet, therefore allowing your core body temperature to reduce. And incidentally, that's, I think, why clonidine helps for sleep, because it's actually pharmacological bed socks. It causes a peripheral vasodilation.
And the other piece of sleep hygiene advice around temperature is often people say, if you can control the temperature of the room, try to make it a little bit warmer. And I think that often comes as a surprise to people, because they think of perhaps it being a little bit colder and then getting nice and snug in their bed. But the advice is to have it. A lot of people aren't in a privileged position where they can control the room temp, but if you can, a little bit more tepid.
So what's the optimum bedroom temperature then?
That is a very good question, Ferghal. I would say 19 degrees, but I'm guessing.
Well, there are others that would suggest, I don't know, 15 to 18 degrees.
It feels a bit
14 to 18 degrees. Yeah, I mean, if you've got insomnia or problems with sleep, that's the optimum. But at the end of the day, you've got to find a temperature that you're comfortable with. Everyone's different.
And should I be drinking caffeine throughout the day, Ferghal?
Should you be drinking caffeine? Well, that's another sleep hygiene thing. So remember, we're talking about sleep hygiene. So we've gone through exercise, we've gone through light, we've gone through cold showers. Now let's talk about caffeine. So the half-life of caffeine varies. And it varies because it's metabolized by the liver, CYP1A2, and it varies anything between 1 to 6 hours. So if you have a very potent metabolism of caffeine, you'll get rid of a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee's got about 100 milligrams of caffeine in it, depending on which brew you have. If your half-life is significantly elevated, you're chomping through the caffeine at a rate of knots, and you'll probably tolerate caffeine all the way through to literally the moment when you decide to go to bed. But if you're someone that doesn't metabolize quite so much, and you've got a half-life of caffeine up to 6 hours, if you have a coffee past 11 o'clock in the morning, there's going to be a significant amounts of caffeine hanging about your system come bedtime that you're just not going to be able to sleep. So again, people vary. And the other big factor that actually comes to play in this is smoking. If you're a smoker, you will then you will stimulate the liver to actually chomp through the caffeine much more quickly. And that's all right. You get used to whatever homeostasis you've got, whatever equilibrium you've got. But if you then decide to quit smoking, you're used to drinking 10 cups of coffee a day, and you continue to drink 10 cups of coffee. All of a sudden, you don't have that liver stimulation to chew through the caffeine. You get a sudden rise in caffeine in your bloodstream. You get caffeine toxicity, which causes irritability, which is also a symptom of tobacco withdrawal. Therefore, you relapse to tobacco use because you think you can't cope with the irritability. Well, actually, you're actually, not dealing with the fact that you've got caffeine toxicity. So smokers who want to quit smoking and who drink a lot of caffeine need to dramatically reduce their caffeine intake when they quit. And, what are the sources of caffeine? It's not just coffee.
Tea, Diet Coke, energy drinks, vodka,
chocolate.
Red Bulls. Oh, I think minimal amounts of chocolate. I mean, unless you're having 70, 80% cocoa. I mean, most people are having dairy milk. We're not concerned about caffeine.
Yeah, how much caffeine is there in a vodka Red Bull?
Quite a lot. And I think, this is what I always think about with to give you an insight into my marital disputes. My wife really wants a TV in the bedroom. And this is something I have fought for a long time because of sleep hygiene. Because obviously the key thing of sleep hygiene is to really build up the brain's association with bedroom and sleep. So you really want to limit what you do in your bedroom. You want your brain to walk into your bedroom and think, bang, sleep time. And the age group I really struggle the most with this is not people that have the choice to put a TV in their bedroom or not, but as young people who don't have a private space in their house except for their bedroom. And it's incredibly difficult talking to young people about sleep hygiene in this particular part of it because, telling a young person to spend time in the living room, especially when they have, some difficulties with their family or disagreement with their parents is a very big ask, and it's very difficult. I really think this is one of the hardest parts of sleep hygiene. Often a young person will have a bedroom and a desk, possibly, God forbid, a computer on that desk.
Or an iPad.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to do that.
Yeah.
And an iPad, Ferghal, how long should I give my eyes a rest from screens before I go to bed?
Look, off the top of my head, I would say an hour. But do you have a paper on this?
No, I don't. But I advise 2 hours. I think you're being pretty generous there. I mean, it's that is in today's age. That is obviously the least followed through of my sleep hygiene advice. So people often, when I say that, people just stare at me blankly and say, "No, I look at my phone." Right up until I go to sleep.
Right up to the moment I put the light on and go to sleep. But blue light technology such as iPads and phones is so detrimental to melatonin secretion and trying to get some sleep. But so we've talked about the need to have, the absence of light, and we've talked about the need for darkness in the bedroom. So the bedroom is reserved for sleeping. It's not for TV. You need to have darkness. But are there any other things you can do at night to maintain sleep hygiene?
Well, you already talked to me about having a warm shower, Ferghal.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about people who kind of struggle to fall asleep and toss and turn and count sheep?
Yeah. So
what would you say to that?
What I say clinically is I say it has been demonstrated that time in bed resting is almost as good as time asleep. What you're really trying to do with that statement is remove the anxiety, because often with insomnia, it's sleep anxiety driven. So the answer is, if you are struggling to sleep and it's taking a long time, get up, do something, reset. Yeah. Do not let that, because that sleep anxiety will really take on a life of its own. And this is where we've spent a lot of time talking ill of technology in this podcast and the influence of smartphones. But this is where I think wearable tech is really, really great, because I really encourage my patients that have poor sleep quality to show me their sleep readouts on their wearable tech, because often people that have insomnia just have out of control sleep hygiene and are getting more sleep than me. So out of control sleep anxiety and are getting more sleep. And it's really key to differentiate. Is this insomnia, or is this shocking sleep anxiety?
Yeah. So I reiterate and that advice. If you can't sleep and you're getting anxious about it, get up and do something quiet. Get up does not mean go for a jog or get into a fight or watch a stimulating movie. It's do something quiet for half an hour, have a milky drink, non-sugar, non-milky drink, some hot water with maybe like chamomile tea, read a dull book, that kind of thing, and then go back to sleep. And that actually reflects the biphasic sleep pattern that people used to engage in. Before we had technology, it was very common to have your first sleep, then get up, do an hour to 2 hours of diary writing, which is why we know that this kind of thing happened, because we can read people's diaries, and then go back to sleep for second sleep. But then that meant that you went to bed with the dusk and you woke up with the dawn, and in between times you had your second activity.
So I know we have to wrap it up, Ferghal. So just wanted to ask you one last question, and that would be: in terms of sleep hygiene, are you more of a fan of a sort of German dinner or an Australian dinner? And by German dinner, I mean Germans tend to have a light lunch, a heavy lunch, and a light dinner, and Australians tend to have a big lunch and a big dinner. What is
we have the obesity epidemic. Yeah, look, it varies. I mean, again, if you've got someone who's got difficulty sleeping and you've corrected everything else, you do need to look at what you're eating. You should, as a general rule, you probably should try and avoid a big meal within 1 to 3 hours of 1 to 4 hours of sleeping. So, and it varies person to person, but you need to understand why we're giving that advice. So if you've consumed a large meal and you're feeling bloated, well, that's not conducive to sleep. However, you need to also understand the biochemistry of what's going on. So if you're eating a protein meal, especially arginine, or if you're eating a carb meal, then you've got all this insulin hanging about, and this insulin then, as we all know, it stimulates the movement of glucose into various tissues, but it also stimulates the movement of certain amino acids into the brain, or rather into the peripheral tissues, thereby increasing the relative concentration of tryptophan. And because the relative concentration of tryptophan is increased, it finds it more easy to cross the blood-brain barrier using a very specific transporter. Therefore, you will then start getting more sleepy hormones, including serotonin and melatonin. So that's a long-winded way of saying if you have a big insulin rush from a big carb meal, you will actually fall asleep more quickly than if you didn't have that carb meal. But you've got to balance that out with the volume effect and the discomfort and bloating effect.
Hence the phrase postprandial nap. But we're getting wrap up in all caps, Ferghal. So I don't know what that means.
All right, let's call this. Do you want to say goodbye then, Richard?
Well, thank you very much for having me on again, and I look forward to our next chat.
That's all for today, folks. That was Richard Bradlow. I'm Ferghal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.